The unconscious is the true psychic reality. In its inner nature, it is just as much unknown to us as the reality of the external world. What if the person you believe yourself to be is not the one in control? What if your conscious thoughts, your reasoned choices, and your sense of self are only the surface of your total mental life? And what if the most powerful part of that life operates in secret, outside of your awareness, following its own primitive and powerful agenda? This is the proposition Sigmund Freud placed at the center of his psychology. He argued that beneath conscious awareness lies a vast unconscious system that shapes thought and behavior in ways the conscious mind cannot perceive or control. To understand how radical this view of the mind was, we have to place ourselves in the intellectual world of the late 19th century. Science was about precision, anatomy, and material explanation. At the time, consciousness was thought to make up the whole of the mind, and people believed that thoughts were fully visible and exhaustive to the thinker. Freud directly confronted this skepticism. In his 1915 paper, The Unconscious, he lays out his core scientific justification in a single, powerful passage. Responding to the charge that his theory was unscientific, he writes, "To this we can reply that our assumption of the existence of the unconscious is necessary and legitimate, and that we possess manifold proofs of the existence of the unconscious. It is necessary because the data of consciousness are exceedingly defective. Both in healthy and in sick persons, mental acts are often in process, which can be explained only by presupposing other acts, of which consciousness yields no evidence." Let's unpack this argument. Freud's starting point is that our conscious experience is full of gaps. He argues that if we look closely, we will find that countless mental processes occur without leaving any evidence in consciousness. He points to several kinds of proof. First, the neurotic symptoms that afflicted his patients. But the evidence was not limited to illness. He pointed to the common blunders of healthy people, slips of the tongue, parapraxis, the momentary forgetting of a name, or the misplacing of an object. And finally, he pointed to our own private mental lives, those sudden ideas that seem to come from nowhere, and the solutions to problems that arrive fully formed in our minds. Freud's position is that if we only accept conscious thoughts as real, all these events remain disconnected and meaningless accidents. But if we take into account the unconscious acts we can infer, a coherent pattern emerges. By postulating a hidden cause, we achieve a gain in meaning and connection. This scientific payoff, he argued, is the ultimate justification for his theory. This was Freud's great heresy. It was not just in claiming the unconscious existed, but in demonstrating a scientific method, a way of reasoning from the observable gaps in consciousness, to prove its existence and demonstrate its influence. This is the scientific foundation upon which Freud built his life's work, and it is the foundation upon which we will now build our understanding of his complete theory of the unconscious. Here's the roadmap for today's video. First, we will lay out Freud's complete map of the mind, his topographical model, to see exactly how he viewed the psyche and where the unconscious fits within its structure. Next, we will examine the unconscious itself, exploring its deep nature, its logic, and its dynamic processes. Finally, we will consider how the unconscious becomes observable, with dreams serving as its primary channel of expression, which Freud famously described as the royal road to the unconscious. Before we continue, we strongly recommend installing Mirror. The app will elevate your consciousness to a new plane. Powered by an AI aware of your unique inner world, Mirror will help you discover the meaning of your dreams and expand your understanding of your own unconscious. Click the link in the top right corner to download Mirror and start understanding who you truly are. To understand the unconscious, we must first understand Freud's model of the mind, the topographical model. This model is not anatomical, but psychic. It describes the organization and functional dynamics of mental life, rather than the brain's physical structures. Freud was very clear about this distinction from the outset. He knew he was creating a new kind of map, and he laid down a crucial ground rule for his exploration. In the interpretation of dreams, he writes, "The idea, which is thus put before us, is one of psychic locality. We shall wholly ignore the fact that the psychic apparatus concerned is known to us also as an anatomical preparation, and we shall carefully avoid the temptation to determine the psychic locality in any anatomical sense. We shall remain on psychological ground. I see no harm in such an attempt. I think that we should give free rein to our conjectures, provided we keep our heads and do not mistake the scaffolding for the building." Let's break this down, because it is the foundation of everything that follows. When Freud speaks of a psychic locality, he's proposing a mental topography. He's not talking about physical places in the brain tissue. He's describing functional regions within a psychic apparatus, a model designed to explain how the mind works, not where it is located. And notice his own caution. He knows he is building a theoretical model, what he calls a scaffolding, not describing the final building of the mind itself. This scaffolding is a tool, a way of thinking about the mind's functions as distinct systems. And with this rule in place, he begins to draw his map. This model divides the psyche into three distinct regions: the conscious, the preconscious, and the unconscious. Let's begin with the system we know best, or at least the one we think we know best, the conscious system. For Freud, the conscious system is not the source of our thoughts. Instead, it is a specialized psychic organ whose function is to perceive them. Think of it like a screen. It doesn't generate the movie. It simply displays the images projected onto it. This system is what allows us to be aware of the world, both internal and external. But it has a critical limitation. The conscious system has no memory. Like our eyes, which receive new light every moment without retaining the old images, the conscious system is designed to perceive psychic qualities in the present. As Freud explains, it is excitable by qualities and incapable of retaining the trace of changes. The moment a thought leaves the screen of consciousness, it is gone from that system. The memory of it must be stored elsewhere. This elsewhere is the antechamber to consciousness, the preconscious. The preconscious system is the vast storeroom of everything that is not currently in your consciousness, but is readily available to it. If I ask you for your address, or what you ate for breakfast, you do not need to embark on a deep psychological excavation. You simply summon the information from the preconscious. Its contents are latent, but they are accessible. They can become conscious without meeting any significant resistance. The defining feature of the preconscious, and what separates it from the deeper unconscious, is its connection to language. The thoughts in the preconscious are linked to words. Freud called these word presentations. This connection is what allows them to be organized, logical, and communicable. It is the realm of reason, of calculation, and of our available identity. It is the system that runs on the rules of waking life. Beneath the conscious and the preconscious lies the foundational and most extensive region of the psyche, the unconscious. This is not simply what we are unaware of. It is a dynamic system whose contents are actively barred from consciousness. They are, in Freud's term, repressed. The unconscious is the oldest part of the mind. It is the realm of our primal instinctual drives and wishes, many of which originate in the forgotten landscape of early childhood. These wishes are the raw engine of the psyche. They constantly strive for expression and gratification. But unlike the preconscious, the unconscious does not think in words. Its contents exist as raw, uncivilized, pure images, feelings, and impulses, unconnected to language, which Freud refers as thing presentations. Because it lacks language, the unconscious operates by a different, more primitive set of rules. It is a world without time, without logic, and without morality. It is a chaotic, powerful, and timeless domain, and standing guard at the border between this primal world and the orderly realm of the preconscious is a formidable agent, the censor. To explain the dynamic relationship between these three systems, Freud introduced the concept of the censor. The censor is a function, a dynamic force that acts as a gatekeeper. It stands at the frontier between the unconscious and the preconscious. Its primary task is to examine the wish impulses that surge up from the unconscious and to repress any that are deemed too threatening, too painful, or too morally unacceptable to be allowed into the ordered society of the preconscious mind. It protects our conscious self from the raw, often terrifying nature of our deepest desires. The sensor's vigilance, however, is not constant. During our waking life, it is at its most powerful, maintaining a firm grip on the repressed material. But during sleep, the censor relaxes. It doesn't disappear entirely, but its guard is lowered. This partial relaxation is what makes dreams possible. It opens a temporary gateway, allowing forbidden wishes from the unconscious to slip past the border, but only on one condition. They must be disguised. The dream, as we shall see, is the disguised fulfillment of a repressed wish. To fully grasp Freud's model, we must understand that these systems are not just different containers for thought. They operate on entirely different principles. They are like two different computers running two incompatible operating systems. The system unconscious runs on what Freud called the primary process. This is the original, primitive, and irrational mode of mental functioning. Its sole aim is immediate gratification and the free discharge of psychic energy. It does not follow the rules of conscious, rational logic. It operates by condensing multiple ideas into one and displacing emotion from its true source onto a seemingly trivial substitute. The system preconscious, and by extension the conscious, runs on the secondary process. This is the mature, rational mode of thinking that we associate with logic and reality. It is capable of delaying gratification, tolerating tension, and distinguishing between fantasy and the external world. It is the operating system of reason. The profound difference between these two processes is the key to understanding the alien nature of the unconscious. As Freud refined his model, he wrestled with a subtle but profound question. When a repressed idea moves from the unconscious to the preconscious, what exactly is happening? Is it a topographical change? Does the mind create a second registration, a new copy of the idea in a new location, while the original unconscious record remains untouched? Or is it a functional change? Is it the same idea in the same place that has simply changed its state of energy? Like a file on a computer changing from hidden to visible. Freud found his answer in his clinical practice. He observed that when he communicated a repressed thought to a patient, it made almost no difference at first. As he writes, our telling him makes at first no change in his mental condition. Above all, it does not remove the repression. On the contrary, all that we shall achieve at first will be a fresh rejection of the repressed idea. At this moment, Freud realized, the patient holds the same idea in two different forms, in two separate psychic localities. First, there is the conscious idea, heard from the analyst, an auditory memory linked to words existing in the preconscious. Second, there is the original, unconscious memory of the experience itself, a raw, emotional thing presentation, still trapped in the unconscious. The cure, Freud discovered, only happens when the conscious idea, after a long struggle against resistance, finally unites with and awakens the unconscious memory trace. This clinical fact led Freud to realize that an idea doesn't just change its state, it must make a journey from one psychic location to another. This topographical model, with its distinct regions, its watchful censor, and its two warring operating systems, is the essential framework for Freud's entire science of the mind. It provides the map we need to begin our journey into the dark continent of the unconscious itself. Now that we understand Freud's model of the mind, we can explore the unconscious itself as a living, dynamic process. We have already seen that the primary process is the primitive mode of mental functioning, in contrast to the rational secondary process that guides the preconscious and conscious. Let us now examine how this process actually operates, its rules, its energy, and its consequences for psychic life. First, the primary process is governed entirely by the pleasure principle. Its one and only goal is the immediate discharge of psychic energy to gain pleasure and avoid pain. It cannot delay gratification. It is a system devoid of thought, planning, or patience. It simply wishes. Second, the unconscious is exempt from mutual contradiction. As Freud writes, it contains wish impulses, which exist independently side by side, and are exempt from mutual contradiction. In the unconscious, you can love and hate the same person at the same moment. Opposing ideas do not cancel each other out. Instead, they often combine to form strange compromises. The word no does not exist for a dream or for the unconscious. Logic, as we know it, simply does not apply. Third, its processes are timeless. Freud is explicit. They are not ordered temporally, are not altered by the passage of time, in fact bear no relation to time at all. An unfulfilled wish from the age of 3 carries the same urgent present tense force as an impulse from 5 minutes ago. In this realm, the past is never past. It is eternally present and active. Finally, and most crucially, the energy in the unconscious has an extraordinary mobility. In secondary process thinking, psychic energy is bound. It remains attached to the ideas it belongs to. In the primary process, energy is free, flowing fluidly from one idea to another, following the paths of association instead of the rules of logic. This model immediately presents a paradox. Freud speaks of unconscious wishes, impulses, and ideas. But what about unconscious feelings? He asks the question himself. Are there also unconscious instinctual impulses, emotions, and feelings? Or are such constructions in this instance devoid of any meaning? The very idea seems like a contradiction in terms. As Freud notes, it is surely of the essence of an emotion that we should feel it, that it should enter consciousness. So how can we speak of unconscious love, hate, anger, or what he calls the paradoxical unconscious anxiety? Freud's solution is subtle but profound. He argues that an emotion is fundamentally a process of discharge. It has two parts, the raw quantitative charge of affect and the ideational presentation, or the thought to which it is attached. Repression's target is not the feeling itself, but the idea to which it is attached. He explains, by the repression of its proper presentation, it is forced to become connected with another idea, and is now interpreted by consciousness as the expression of this other idea. In this case, Freud says, the original affect was never truly unconscious, but its meaning has been misconstrued. Imagine you feel a profound and inexplicable sadness when you look at a perfectly neutral object. The sadness is conscious. You feel it acutely. But the idea that originally generated that sadness, perhaps a repressed memory of a childhood loss, is unconscious. The affective charge has been displaced from its true repressed source onto a harmless, conscious substitute. So when psychoanalysis speaks of an unconscious affect, it refers to the potential of a repressed idea to generate that feeling once the work of repression is undone. The idea remains in the unconscious as an actual formation, while the affect exists only as a potential disposition which is prevented from developing. We have established that the unconscious operates by a primitive logic. But how does it think? What is the form of its ideas? This is perhaps the deepest and most difficult question, and Freud found his most powerful clues in a surprising place. The speech of schizophrenic patients. He observed that in schizophrenia, patients seem to lose the normal abstract way of using language. Their speech became concrete, literal, and strangely related to their bodily organs. He called it organ speech. To understand this, we must look more deeply into Freud's distinction between the word presentation and the thing presentation. A thing presentation is the mind's raw memory of an object or experience. It holds the sensory traces of the thing, how it looks, sounds, or feels, rather than any verbal or conceptual idea. Freud describes this as a cathexis, a direct investment of mental energy in those sensory memories. A word presentation, like we've discussed by contrast, belongs to the system preconscious. It is the memory of the word that corresponds to the thing. For an idea to become conscious, the raw thing presentation from the unconscious must first be linked to its corresponding word presentation in the preconscious. As Freud summarizes it, the conscious idea comprises the concrete idea, plus the verbal idea corresponding to it, whilst the unconscious idea is that of the thing alone. Freud saw this schism between word and thing enacted in the speech of his patients. He cites the work of his colleague, Dr. Victor Tausk, who described a young woman who, after a quarrel with her lover, complained that her eyes were not right, they were twisted. On the surface, this is nonsensical, but through analysis, she explained her meaning. Her lover, she said, was a deceiver, an eye twister, an Augenverdreher in German. He had twisted her eyes, so now she saw the world with different eyes. Here we see the process in action. The abstract metaphorical thought, my lover is a deceiver, has been stripped of its meaning and has regressed to a concrete, literal and physical expression. My eyes are twisted. The relation to the bodily organ has, as Freud puts it, usurped the place of the whole content of the thought. The patient is no longer using language to describe an idea. Her body is using the language of an organ to enact it. Another example makes this even clearer. The case of one of his own patient, a man obsessed with the threat of castration who had developed a fixation on the blackheads on his face. For this patient, the connection was not logical or visual, but was based on a literal concrete play on words and sensations. When you squeeze a blackhead, something spurts out. The verbal identity, not the objective resemblance, forged the link. This led to the bizarre but psychologically consistent symptom, where he saw every pore on his skin, every little hole, as a symbol of the female genitals, based on the cynical saying, "A hole is a hole." The word had been treated as a thing, and the metaphor had become a reality. Freud writes in his paper, The Unconscious, if we ask ourselves what it is that gives the character of strangeness to the substitute formation and the symptom in schizophrenia, we come at last to understand that it is the predominance of the word relation over that of the thing. There is only a very slight similarity between the squeezing out of a blackhead and an ejaculation from the penis, still less similarity between the countless little pores of the skin and the vagina. But in the former case, there is in both instances a spurting out, while in the latter, the cynical saying, "A hole is a hole," is literally true. The identity of the two, when expressed in words, not the resemblance of the objects designated, has dictated the substitution. This leads us to the grand conclusion about the language of the unconscious. The primary process thinks in thing presentations, in raw, sensory, pictorial images. The secondary process thinks in word presentations. The bridge between them is language. This is the fundamental mechanism of repression in action. It is an act of detranslation. Repression, Freud concludes, denies the rejected unconscious idea translation into words which are to remain attached to the object. We now understand the theoretical landscape of the unconscious. We have mapped the topographical regions of the mind, studied the grammar of its primary process, and conceptualized the powerful force of repression that keeps it hidden. But a theory of a hidden world is incomplete until we can understand how that world communicates and influences us. Where, then, can we witness the unconscious in action? Freud's answer was that we witness it every night, in our dreams. For him, dreams were not just random mental noise. They were the single most important and reliable window into the workings of the unconscious mind. As Freud famously put it, the interpretation of dreams is the royal road to a knowledge of the unconscious activities of the mind. Dreams are the perfect expression of the unconscious because the state of sleep creates a unique set of conditions, a kind of controlled psychic laboratory where unconscious processes can unfold. First, access to motility, our capacity for movement and physical action, is blocked. When we are asleep, the pathway from our thoughts to our voluntary muscles is shut down. We can dream of running, fighting, or flying, but our bodies remain at rest. This creates a safe, contained environment where the most powerful and primitive impulses can be allowed to play out without any real-world consequences. Second, and most importantly, the censor relaxes its guard. As we have seen in the topographical model, the censor functions as the watchful boundary between the unconscious and the preconscious, filtering which thoughts and wishes are permitted to rise toward awareness. The tireless energy required to maintain repression during our waking life is diminished during sleep. The guardian at the gate between the unconscious and the preconscious becomes drowsy. This lowering of defenses allows repressed material, the forbidden wishes of the unconscious, to find a path toward expression. The dream, therefore, is a pure psychic product. It is a formation that emerges when the grip of waking reality is loosened, allowing the deeper, truer psychic reality of the unconscious to reveal itself. However, the censor only relaxes. It does not disappear entirely. It is still on duty, and it forces the emerging unconscious wishes to disguise themselves. This act of disguise is the key to understanding the dream structure. It means that every dream has two faces, two distinct texts that must be carefully separated. First, there is the manifest content. This is the dream as we remember it upon waking. It is the story we tell ourselves, the bizarre sequence of images, the nonsensical events, the strange feelings. This is the disguised, often incomprehensible surface of the dream. But hidden behind this facade is the latent content, or the dream thoughts. This is the true meaning of the dream. It is the collection of unconscious wishes, impulses, memories, and day residues that provide the raw material for the dream. Unlike the manifest dream, the latent content is perfectly logical, coherent, and deeply significant. The task of dream interpretation, then, is to reverse this process of disguise. It is to work backward from the manifest text to uncover the hidden latent text. To frame this task, Freud used a powerful analogy. A dream, he wrote, is like a rebus, or a picture puzzle. The set of processes that translates the latent thoughts into the manifest dream is what Freud called the dream work. Our job is to understand its mechanisms. To demonstrate his scientific method, Freud did something unprecedented. He placed his own mind under the microscope. The most famous example in the interpretation of dreams is his analysis of a dream he had in the spring of 1897, which he called the dream of the uncle with the yellow beard. By following his analysis, we can watch the dream work in action. Let's begin with the context, the events of the day that set the dream in motion. Freud was feeling a great deal of anxiety about his career. He had recently been nominated for the title of Professor Extraordinarius, a significant honor. However, he was pessimistic. He knew that the ministry often disregarded such nominations, especially for Jewish academics. His anxiety was compounded when a friend, whom he calls R, visited him. R was in the same position and had just been unofficially told by an official that his own appointment was being held up due to these very denominational concerns. This confirmed Freud's fears. That night, Freud had a dream. Here is the manifest content. The dream had two parts. The first thought was, my friend R is my uncle. This was accompanied by a feeling of great affection for him. The second part was an image. I see before me his face, somewhat altered. It seems to be elongated. A yellow beard which surrounds it is seen with peculiar distinctness. What was Freud's own conscious reaction to this upon waking? He writes, when I recollected the dream in the course of the morning, I laughed outright and said, the dream is nonsense. For the psychoanalyst, this immediate dismissal is the first clue. This feeling of it's just nonsense is not an objective judgment. It is a manifestation of the sensor's resistance. It is the mind's attempt to hide the dream's meaning precisely because that meaning is so significant. But Freud, applying his own method, refused to be put off. Freud begins his investigation by treating each manifest element as a manifest symbol to be deciphered through free association. The first clue is the strange image of his friend R with a yellow beard. Freud's friend R was dark-haired, but the image immediately brings someone else to his mind, his own Uncle Joseph, who had a long face framed by a yellow beard. This is the first key discovery. The manifest image is a composite figure. What the dream has done is fuse two separate people, his friend R and his Uncle Joseph, into a single, impossible image. This reveals the first great principle of the dream work, condensation. Condensation is the mind's primary method of compression. It is the way the dream work packs immense amounts of latent meaning, multiple people, ideas, and memories into a single, overcharged manifest element. The yellow beard is not just a beard. It is a nodal point where two separate chains of thought intersect. But why fuse these two specific people? Freud follows the association to his uncle. Uncle Joseph, he recalls, was a kind man, but also a simpleton who had run afoul of the law in his youth. By fusing R with his uncle, the dream is not just combining two images, it is creating a slanderous equation. The manifest thought, my friend R is my uncle, now translates to a latent thought, my friend R is a simpleton. This reveals the second principle of the dream work. The dream thinks in pictures. It does not use abstract language. To express the judgment R is a simpleton, it does not use those words. Instead, it regresses to a more primitive mode of representation. It translates the abstract idea into a concrete visual image, the figure of the simpleton uncle. This is the principle of regard for representability. The dream work is forced to find a pictorial, symbolic, or concrete way to represent the abstract thoughts of the latent content. This leaves the most puzzling clue, the manifest feeling of great affection for R. This feeling directly contradicts the latent content we have just uncovered, which is a hostile and derogatory judgment. How can a dream that calls his friend a simpleton be accompanied by a feeling of great tenderness? This, Freud explains, is the masterstroke of the censor's disguise. The intense hostility and ambition in the latent thoughts are too dangerous to appear in the dream undisguised. The censor will not allow it, so the dream work is forced to perform its most powerful operation. It detaches the true emotion, hostility, from the thought and replaces it with its exact opposite, affection. This is the third and most crucial principle, displacement. Displacement can shift the emotional accent from an important idea to a trivial one, or, as in this case, it can invert an affect entirely, turning hate into love as a form of camouflage. The manifest feeling of affection is a mask, a reaction formation designed to conceal the true, forbidden feeling of the latent content. Finally, Freud notes that the dream presents these elements in a semi-plausible narrative structure. This final tidying up, which gives the dream its story-like quality, is the work of the fourth mechanism, secondary elaboration. This is the contribution of the preconscious mind, which tries to impose order and coherence onto the bizarre products of the dream work, much like our waking mind does when it tries to make sense of a confusing story. Freud can now reconstruct the uncensored thought, the latent content of the dream. His analysis extends beyond R. He recalls a conversation with his colleague N, who had also been nominated for a professorship. During their discussion, N mentioned a past incident in which a woman had brought a criminal accusation against him, though the matter was later resolved. Freud's associations link this story to his Uncle Joseph's own criminal past, leading him to interpret N's situation as analogous to his uncle's. In this way, the dream covertly weaves together two unconscious judgments. R is represented as a simpleton, and N as a criminal. The self-serving logic of the latent dream thought thus emerges. If denominational considerations are a determining factor in the postponement of my two friends' appointment, then my own appointment is likewise in jeopardy. But if I can refer the rejection of my two friends to other causes, which do not apply to my own case, my hopes are unaffected. This is the procedure followed by my dream. It makes the one friend R a simpleton, and the other, N, a criminal. But since I am neither one nor the other, there is nothing in common between us. I have a right to enjoy my appointment. The conclusion is clear. The nonsensical dream is, in fact, an expression of a perfectly structured, logical, and profoundly selfish wish fulfillment. The dream's manifest absurdity is not a sign of faulty mental processing. It is the necessary disguise forced upon the latent thoughts by the censor. The very existence of this elaborate distortion reveals the censor at work, and thus the forbidden wish it seeks to conceal. As Freud concludes, wherever a wish fulfillment is unrecognizable and disguised, there must be present a tendency to defend oneself against this wish, and in consequence of this defense, the wish is unable to express itself save in a distorted form. From this one deeply personal example, Freud generalizes a universal principle of dream formation. He uses a powerful economic analogy to explain how the unconscious powers our dreams. A thought left over from the day, a worry, an unresolved problem, what Freud calls a day residue, is like an entrepreneur. The entrepreneur has an idea for a business, a dream, but he has no money and no power. He cannot start the business on his own. To get his business off the ground, he needs to find a capitalist, a wealthy backer who will lend him the necessary capital. In the psyche, this capitalist is a powerful, repressed, infantile, unconscious wish. These are the immortal, ever-active wishes of our earliest childhood. Wishes for greatness, for love, for revenge, that have been repressed but never extinguished. They are the great reservoir of psychic energy. The dream is formed when the powerless entrepreneur, the day residue, like Freud's worry about the professorship, makes contact with and borrows energy from the powerful capitalist. The infantile wish, like Freud's childhood ambition to be a great man. The day residue gives the unconscious wish a current vehicle for expression, and the unconscious wish gives the day residue the psychic power to become a dream. This explains why every dream, no matter how clearly it seems to be triggered by recent events, is ultimately an expression powered by the immense and inexhaustible energy of our earliest, most primitive desires. Our investigation into Sigmund Freud's theory of the unconscious has taken us on a journey deep into the architecture of the human mind. His topographical model gave us the three great regions of the psyche, the conscious, the preconscious, and the unconscious, and revealed the dynamic force of the censor that stands between them. From there, we ventured into the strange territory of the unconscious itself. We explored the pre-logical rules of the primary process, its relentless pursuit of pleasure, its exemption from contradiction, its timelessness, and its fluid, mobile energy. Finally, we saw how Freud developed a scientific method to observe this hidden world. Through the analysis of dreams, he showed that the manifest story is a coded message, a hieroglyphic script produced by the intricate mechanisms of the dream work. By decoding the processes of condensation, displacement, and representation, he revealed the logical, coherent, and profoundly significant latent thoughts hidden beneath. He demonstrated that every dream, no matter its trigger, is an expression powered by the immortal, infantile wishes that form the very core of our being. The journey into the unconscious is the difficult, sometimes disturbing, but ultimately essential journey to self-knowledge. The goal of this journey is not to conquer or eliminate the unconscious, for that would be to eliminate the very source of our psychic energy. The goal is to expand the realm of the conscious. It is the life's work of reclaiming what has been repressed, of giving words to what was once only a raw presentation, and of integrating the divided self. It is the work of making the unconscious conscious. Thank you for watching the video. It was a pleasure having you on board. Download Mirror with the link in our description and take conscious ownership of your personal growth.